kids who come onto the Mesilla Plaza all the time, come on field trips, and they look at this gazebo and the first thing they say is, "That looks like cocoa." Welcome to Mesilla. My name is Alexandra McKinney. I work for the state of New Mexico. I'm a historian and an educator actually with New Mexico Historic Sites. And you are in fact sitting or standing on a New Mexico historic site right now. My job is the history of Mesilla, the history of the Taylor family, and the history of southern New Mexico. Mesilla, its origins come to us via the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, and when the United States ceded all of this land from Mexico at the end of the Mexican-American War, there was a small chunk of southern New Mexico and southern Arizona that were not included as a part of that. The original international boundary line was the Rio Grande River. Today, the Rio Grande River is located about a mile that direction. However, when Mesilla was founded, the Rio Grande was located about a half a mile that direction. This community was founded because it was on the Mexican side of the international border. At the end of the Mexican-American War, there was this huge group of Mexican citizens in places like Doñana, Las Cruces, El Paso, San Elizario, Socorro, Isleta, all the way down kind of this borderland valley here who had absolutely no interest in being a part of this new American territory. And so Ramon Ortiz, who was the parish priest in Juarez at the time, was given special dispensation by both the Mexican and the American government to repatriate Mexican citizens who did not want to be in this new American territory back into Mexico. And that's where Mesilla comes into place. Mesilla was founded by those Mexican citizens who wanted to remain in Mexico. And so they came to Mexico, founded Mesilla, and the problem was, though, that the American government really wanted this land for their transcontinental railroad to California. And so they spent the next several years negotiating with the Mexican government until in 1853, the United States bought the very southern portion of Arizona and New Mexico from Mexico via James Gadsden, who negotiated that treaty called the Gadsden Purchase. And so by December of 1853, this land became American territory anyway. November 16th, 1854, soldiers from Fort Fillmore, which is now currently the remnants of it are underneath pecan orchards south of Las Cruces, marched onto Mesilla, changed the flag from Mexican to American, and the United States took over this land and Mesilla became Mexican anyway, despite the better efforts of the Mexican citizens who tried to stay in Mexico. And so because of that, though, Mesilla has remained very much tied to its Mexican culture, its Mexican character. As you can see by this plaza we are sitting on, it has retained much of what makes it a Mexican community. And that key thing is with its Mexican plaza. In Mexican culture, a plaza is circled around the church right behind me. That's what makes it stand out from an American civic plaza, which is usually you can find that. And this is what you'll find when you go to Las Cruces later on this afternoon, is that is centered around the courthouse. And so you can always tell the difference between a Mexican community and American centered community based on how kind of their central plaza is located, their central civic area is located. And so Mesilla has remained a very Mexican community with this wonderful adobe facades that you see, with this kiosco behind me. It looks very similar to a lot of the small towns that you'll see in northern Mexico, but it also looks very different from nearby Las Cruces for that matter. I have kids who come onto the Mesilla Plaza all the time, come on field trips, and they look at this gazebo and the first thing they say is, "That looks like cocoa." Because that's what they picture in their head. They recognized what a Mexican plaza looks like thanks to Pixar's Coco. And so we still have this great gazebo here, but as you can see right behind me and above my head, it says M54. That is a reference to Mexico and the year 1854. The plaza itself here, the reason it looks the way that it does though is thanks to a federal grant that was added in the 1970s that added all of this brick inlay sidewalk. This kiosco behind me was added in the 1970s. Replacing the original bandstand. But much of this community's intent is to keep its culture and its character alive. And so they still host Cinco de Mayo fiestas, they still host Dia de los Muertos. This community is very, very strongly tied to its Mexican heritage, and you will see that as we walk around the plaza. There was no taking of land. The problem is that the Mexican culture didn't usually write down their deeds and record them in the courthouse, like was very, so what ended up happening is you had this kind of clash of two different cultures coming together, where you had a people who, you just hold on to your deed, and when you give away, when you sell your home, you give that person the deed, and that's the extent of it, and if you don't have the deed, then that's fine, they just own the property now, so there's now no record of who owns the property. And then you come into this American government who is very insistent on everything being written down and everything being tied to the government. And so it really became a problem later on when they started to sell their property and they didn't have any deeds, or when people started asking for proof that they owned the land and there was no proof via the American government, even though it had been their land for a long time. So it was just a different kind of taking of the property. But there is a clause in that treaty that states that wasn't supposed to be happening. So I know you guys got a brief history of San Albino, but I do want to point out a couple of things here. One thing that you will notice is that this is a brick church. This is not an adobe church. It was originally an adobe church, but this has a very French architecture style look to it. The reason is because in the 1880s, the parish priest who came into Mesilla was a Frenchman, Father Grange. And there was this really kind of unique thing that was happening in New Mexico in the 19th century, where there had been this merging of indigenous religious practices and Catholic practices, and so it created this New Mexican Catholicism. And the French clergy was really, really worried about this sacrilegious Catholicism that had sprung up in New Mexico. And so they sent this wave of French parish clergymen into New Mexico to try and correct the inaccurate practices of Catholicism. And so Father Grange came into New Mexico. He was a very rich man. He brought a lot of money into Mesilla, and so it is because of him that we have this French-style cathedral with the two belfries up on top. He paid for half of this church's building. The community paid for the other half, but he had actually a really good relationship with the parishioners here. And I don't really know why that is exactly. The closest I can think based on records is that he spoke Spanish. He spoke to them in Spanish. He learned Spanish. He's actually known here by a Hispanicized name, Father Grange. But it's interesting, he had a bit of a temper, and so right here in the corner, and I'll when we step away, I'll let everybody take a look so they can see here, but this is the cornerstone right here. And on this side of the cornerstone, what you'll notice is that the builder's name has been completely etched out, and that was because Father Grange got real pissed at the builder and scratched his name out, which is kind of funny. But Father Grange is also buried in the back of the church, which is really kind of beautiful and amazing. So he is also very tied to the Taylor Mesilla Historic Site, which I will really go into detail at the end of our tour. That'll be kind of our last stop. Unfortunately, I can't bring you inside the Taylor Mesilla Historic Site today, but Father Grange did own that property before the Taylors bought the property. So that was his home as well. So he was one of the former owners of that property. So talking about him is really important. But the French, I just really did want to point out this whole French influence in Catholicism here in New Mexico, because the big church in Santa Fe, St. Francis Assisi Cathedral, that's also for the same reason why that is built in a French style, because of Bishop LeMay, who came to New Mexico.